some time now
Yeah,
for
apologies for the
questions
video
from the
calling,
audience. I
guys,
wonder if
but
we should just
I
take
felt
a
this was a
few,
very interesting
and then we
conversation,
can
let's
respond
discuss to
to
this
them all
thing real
together.
quick. Let's see what they're talking about.
Thank you. I have a question. What's the difference between the U.S. debt and the debt that African nations own? Because the U.S. debt doesn't keep the U.S. from being one of the leading powers of the world, but then African nations can't make it because of that debt that is strangling them.
Okay. The first question is a very important question. What makes African and third world debt different from the American debt? Number one, America is never going to pay its debts. It doesn't have to. Its debts are in its own currency. We can simply print it. The African debt is not in its currency. The African debt is in U.S. dollars. Africa has to earn the U.S. dollars, and the only way it can earn the U.S. dollars is not to be assassinated for growing its own food and becoming independent and doing something that the United States does not like. The principle underlying the foundation of the World Bank, the International Bank for IBRD, research, the World Bank, is that no country should grow its own food. Africa and the third world should only grow export crops. To export, in order to have an oversupply of cocoa and other tropical raw materials, to keep down the price, they must buy their grain from the United States or Europe, so that if they do something that we don't like, we can do what America tried to do to China in the 60s. We can sanction them. We can say, we're going to starve you. We're going to not export any grain to you. So owing their foreign debt in dollars means that they have to somehow sell something that the United States wants, not what they want. I think the most evil organizations in the world today are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And my book, Super Imperialism, that I wrote in 1972, is all about that. The largest purchasers of the book were the Defense Department and the CIA. I was immediately, the organization I worked for was given a $85,000 Defense Department contract for me to come to explain to them how American imperialism worked, and they used it as a how to do it book. They thought it was just...
Quite interesting. You know what? So I came across this interview, right? And I'm always curious. So wanted to give my full chest take on this. And it just got my mind thinking. And if you're an African, I mean, this has solved the question that some of us who are interested in this kind of things, I mean, in general, why is it that Africa is always in debt, right? No matter what, almost every African country is in debt, whether it's in debt to the World Bank, the IMF, it's in debt to its colonial people. I don't like to use the word master anymore, but it's in debt to France or whatever, the French colonies of Africa, right? So it's interesting. And I think this makes a lot of sense as to why, whether it's European countries, whether it's the US, can never be in debt because the dollar is the world currency. So like the guy said, all the US has to do is just print more dollars and put it in the market, and that's it. So they're not ever going to pay their debt. It's impossible. But again, so what could be the solution? And I'm always thinking about what's the solution ahead, because these systems have been created. So two things got me thinking. One, what could be the solution for African countries? And then, as the guy said, why is the IMF and the World Bank some of the worst institutions created as he claims? And it just got me thinking, right? So there's something called the African Development Bank. And so could that be a solution? So I was thinking, okay, what does the African Development Bank do? So the charge of the AFDB is to promote sustainable economic development and social progress within Africa. That definition, or their charge, it's not really financially charged, right? So So their work might not be, I mean, of course, they might loan money, but I think it's mainly to kind of help with infrastructural development within the country. But the question again comes to, why doesn't Africa use the AFDB for its loans and things like that, and find a way or a mechanism by which African countries put money within that system so that they can lend money in their own currency so the money can rotate within the continent of Africa? Why isn't that something that they think about? Why the dependence on the euros, the pounds, and the dollars? We have Africa has a system. Why not find a way to make that system work for itself so that Africa is not always in debt? That would be my thought process. I don't know if anybody works in this. If you're listening to my channel and you think I'm wrong, or you think that there's a reason why the AFDB is not utilized for this purpose, please let me know, because I'm curious to why. Because if the AFDB is utilized for loans, credits, and things like that for African countries, specifically, because Africa is huge, right? Then countries will be loaning money in its currency, or a way to make them not so much fully in debt. So that's one point, right? Another point I was thinking of, and I began to think, because, growing up, if you're African, most of the time you wanted to work in the World Bank, you wanted to work in the IMF, stuff like that, because they look like all these like huge institutions. So I'm like, okay, so let me look at the IMF, for example, right? So the work of the IMF. So the IMF's work is to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, and facilitate international trade. It also promotes employment and sustainable economic growth, blah, 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 and all that stuff. So it's charged with doing that. And, and some of the other things it does, like the IMF, they lend money, which is one of the main things they do. And they always lend money to African countries, right? And then when they lend this money to African countries, they end up being in debt because they borrow a lot of money and they can never pay it back. It takes years to pay it. And you have to understand that there's interest that is being accrued, right? Just like when you take a loan. So it's like African countries are put into a system where they can never get out of that money that they lent. Why is that? So to understand the reason, I went further. I'm like, okay, the IMF, who developed the IMF, right? Who are the people who made this machine? No, duh. It's the colonial masters. So the IMF was primarily developed by someone called Harry Dexter White. He's a U.S. Treasury official, and John Maynard Keynes. I mean, the Keynes theory, if you study economics of development, I mean, you've heard of John Maynard Keynes, right? So now, looking at the people that developed the IMF, and it's okay, who developed the World Bank? No, duh, the same person developed the World Bank. So my thing is that now no one will develop a system that will work against itself, right? So if you're building a system, the whole purpose of building that system is to make it advantageous to you. So you can't blame the US or any other country for creating a system that favors them. It's natural. That's what you want to do. That's being smart. So what is the moral of the story here? The moral of the story is that the IMF and the World Bank are not saviors for African countries, right? They are systems, I believe, or I think, that are put in place to continue the the system whereby African countries continue to loan money, or they have this imaginary savior, right, that is in them. Because African countries, I believe, they look at these institutions as their savior. They go there, lend money, interest is accrued, and they keep on just being in debt forever and ever, right? And they can never get out of poverty, even though the systems are created to alleviate poverty. These systems are put in place to be advantageous for the people who made them, right? And they bring more money for the people who made them, and you can't blame them for that. So African countries need to rely, I believe, on their institutions for help, for financial stability. If it's not there yet, put in the resources and time to make it there yet. If the African Development Bank is not working, create another institution. Africa is huge. Africa can do it. The resources are there to make these things happen. Why are African countries not thinking like this? It baffles me all the time. Once again, let me know what you guys think. If you have other suggestions, other theories, let me know, man. As always, this is Food Chest.